I like books, you like books, I have new books, we could probably not talk about these new books. First books have to do with inflation. So I want to learn about inflation because inflation's just, it's going off all over the place. America, Middle East, Europe. Inflation is literally out of control. At least this is what I've seen myself. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just like completely off my bonkers, whatever that means. But these books are basically by this guy named James Rickards. James Rickards with an S.
Nice.
James Rickards, and he's considered like a conspiracy theorist of Wall Street. He's reputable, intelligent, works in big companies. He's a big guy, big brain guy. But these books are obviously for some reason called conspiracy theorist books. I don't know why. But he deals with inflation. And these 3 books I got specifically to deal with inflation. The first one is Gold. It's The New Case for Gold, which literally could be translated in this case to The Old Case for Gold. These aren't new arguments. But if you're not familiar with the arguments of gold, then read this book. I'm reading this book because I want a refresher, and I'm currently debating how much of my pie chart I should give to gold. Maybe I'll get more slices of pie for gold. We'll see. The next one is Currency Wars, the making of the next global crisis. So basically he takes this idea that like things like Europe and America competing for the petrodollar, as well as China, all of them competing for the petrodollar, inflates their currencies. The trade war between America and China inflates the currency. Obviously COVID is going to inflate the currency. So because there's all these currency wars going on, you now will see that there's inflation, and he's going to argue that here's another reason why we should be concerned about inflation. The last book is Aftermath. So if you didn't get this theme yet, his whole entire like shtick is just like inflation, what it's causing inflation. There's inflation here, inflation there, we should buy gold, we should buy more gold. Stuff like this, right? And this book is another book that goes after all his other works to say, here are some techniques, some advantages to hedge your wealth against, like basically diversify away from some of these assets that are susceptible to inflation, right? He's giving you some strategies to invest that will help you avoid inflation. That's what this book is going to be. So those are some books on inflation, and if those books are good, I will probably read the rest of his books, but I'm not even going to get to those books probably in the next 6 months, so...
Statistically speaking, it was bound to fail anyway.
The next book is On Apology. So I got this book because I like when people formalize very specific niche areas of human existence, right? Like apologizing, receiving apologies. This is very specific about like human life. And what this book is going to do is go over different studies about the nature of apology. So for example, what makes a good apology? Why are apologies so effective? How should you give an apology, right? It would be interesting if there was animal studies in here. I don't know if there is, but that would be really cool if there was like animals did apologies as well. Not that we're not animals, but you get what I mean, like non-humans doing apologies. Like Richard Dawkins did a whole PhD thesis on like the nature of gossip between birds. That's really cool, that birds gossip. But also, they should probably keep my wife's name out your... Yeah, I love when people do niche areas of human existence. And like it's kind of like Michel de Montaigne or Ralph Waldo Emerson. Like Michel de Montaigne has a whole essay about the nature of being drunk. And then I think that essay is followed up by like the nature of education. It's just very whimsical, very specific areas of life where you give really complex elaborations on. That's really fun, really cool. Excited to read this. Okay, now this book I'm excited to read because it's called The Psychology of the Unconscious, Symbolisms and Its Transformation of the Libido. It's a Jung book, it's Jungian psychology book. This is also the book that solidified the fundamental disagreements between Freud and Jung on the nature of the libido, basically when they stopped being friends. Now the reason why I'm not excited to read this book actually is because it's going to be esoteric as hell. The theme of the book is Jung analyzes the dreams of someone who he thought was developing schizophrenia, and he thought that the symbols in the dreams were like an indication that schizophrenia was going to like eventually come to this person. Now, that's fun and all, but that's really esoteric, and therefore I feel like the language is going to be difficult to read. And on top of that, the person actually did not receive schizophrenia, they didn't get schizophrenia. And so like he's completely just off base. This book is like literally wrong. Jungian psychologists won't admit that. They won't tell you that, right? But I don't read Jungian psychology to get like an accurate conception of the world. It's just for fun and for like abstract creative models, right? It's a very different way of thinking than I'm used to. That's why I'm reading it. I don't think it's true. I don't think you can analyze alchemical symbols in someone's dreams to determine whether they're going to get schizophrenia or not. I think you'd look at their brain with their genes and maybe do that, but not the images. Anyways, the person didn't get schizophrenia. The book is wrong. It's going to be esoteric. But since I'm reading every book Jung ever wrote, I'm going to have to go through it. The next book is a Ghandi biography. I've had this book for a while now, and everybody has told me to read it, but at the same time, everybody told me to read critiques of it. I don't know if it's a controversial book. I don't know if it's the case that there's some truths about Ghandi that people just don't like. I mean, this is definitely the case with Nelson Mandela. There was some very, very, we'll say, non-savory things that he had to do. And not every political leader should be romanticized. There's probably downfalls. So for that reason, I'm not sure if this is a controversial book or not. The reason why I got it is because I want to study Indian history, okay? Modern history. I do this with Russia, where I have books on Gorbachev, Khrushchev, Stalin, Yeltsin, Putin. I do this with any country where I study. I go and look at the leaders. And when I've been told that this book is great, but also terrible. So I don't know. I'm not going to read it anytime soon. Maybe it'll get better over time as people forget about it. But yeah, Ghandi biography. Another book is Ancient Egypt from Farmers to the Pyramids. This is volume 2 out of volume 1. No, this is volume 1 out of volume 2.
Whoopsie daisy!
The reason why I have this book is not because I have a particular interest in ancient Egypt, but it's because I'm studying Middle Eastern history, and I've said this before, where I'm going to take a general approach to Middle Eastern history first, then I'll go country by country. And the reason why I would do ancient Egypt as well, in addition to modern Egyptian history, is because I think there's a stronger connection between ancient Egyptian history and modern Egyptian history than, say, Canada in modern Canada, like ancient Canada, whatever that would mean, in modern Canada, right? I think there's a stronger connection here. Same thing with America, right? Or even some European countries. And so because there's a stronger connection between the very, very old history and modern Egypt, I will therefore read older stuff in Egypt. Like, for example, Ottoman rule over Egypt that's still relevant to today, I would argue. Another book, Aristotle on the Nature of the Soul and Other Psychological Works. I always view Aristotle as a mix between Jung and Bertrand Russell. Because Aristotle has this whole thing about using syllogisms to argue for things, but he then applies these syllogisms to very subjective properties like sense perception, stuff like this. And that's what he does in this book, actually. This is a very psychological book, but it uses formal syllogisms to argue for the stuff, which is very different than Jung. And it goes over things like sense perception and how that relates to the soul, nutrition, how that relates to the soul, cognition, how that relates to the soul, and memory, stuff like this, right? It goes by these very, how should you say, carved up conception of human existence, right? Like memory is one thing, cognition is another thing, the sense perception is another. He just throws them into these random buckets, and he walks into the room where this bucket is and analyzes it as it relates to the soul. That's kind of the approach in this book, all while using syllogisms. It'll be a fun read. I don't expect to learn much from it because it's just another book that's kind of quasi-metaphysics.
You know, people don't understand. I went to an Ivy League college. I was a nice student. I did very well. I'm a very intelligent...
Yeah, it'll be a fun read. We'll leave it at that. Now, next one is 3 books, Eastern philosophy books. Jung loves to talk about Eastern philosophy. In fact, every analytical psychologist at some point mentions Eastern philosophy. I'm familiar with the East-Western, the mixed philosophy of Schopenhauer or Alan Watts.
Oh no, the codex.
But I'm not familiar with just straight up Eastern philosophy that hasn't been translated to Western thought or combined with Western thought. And so I got some Eastern philosophy books. First one is Tao Te Ching, if I said that right. And this is considered one of the foundational texts of Taoist philosophy and religion. I've read critiques of English translations. I actually hear this all the time, that you can't translate books into English if they're written in a foreign language because you miss some of the meanings. I don't actually agree with that because that's kind of insinuates some kind of linguistic determinism, which is just not true. What you could argue is that the associations aren't correct, but a good translator could probably clarify what kind of association you need to add on to this. So for example, a linguistic determinist would probably argue that if I say that's a red car, then my thoughts must be about a red car, right? So the language is like determining thought. If I read that's a red car, right? But I could read that's a red car and be thinking about like polar bears, right? This is why I would say if there's an associated meaning with the word on a page, you could definitely add more associations to that meaning if it's not the proper meaning in the native language. I mean, this isn't a linguistics video. I won't get too much into it. I don't really agree with those kinds of arguments. Yeah, I think you can translate something into English and just add more English words to clarify what the concept actually means.
I'm smart.
The next one is, no, the next two. So I'll just go to the next one. The next one is Confucius, the analects. Basically, this is a bunch of ideas that Confucius had and his students put them into a book, and they've since been just published from generation into generation. It's kind of like Human Ought to Human of Nietzsche. It's just a bunch of aphorisms, I believe. It's just like 5 sentences here, 6 sentences here, 7 sentences there. And there's some commentary alongside it. I believe the person also added some commentary. So this is just some basic Confucius thought. I don't think this is even the core of Confucius thought, but it's definitely something worth reading if you're going to get into Eastern philosophy, right? The Book of Shang Tzu.
Your soul is mine.
This book is considered another Taoist philosophy book, and this book is very different from the other one in the sense that the first one, I believe, teaches the doctrine of Taoist philosophy, but this one teaches Taoist philosophy as a way of life, and that a true Taoist doesn't focus on the philosophy, but focuses on the way of life. It's not so much a set of beliefs, but a set of behaviors. That's what this book argues. Now, this last book is Mysterium and, Mysterium and conuictionis. I don't know how to say it, okay? I'm not going to learn how to say it either, because I don't care. Basically, this is considered Jung's, magnum opus, like his greatest work. Apparently, when he wrote this book, he said, okay, my psychology is now out there, and everybody can just analyze it as it is. It's like a complete system. And this book will go over alchemy as it relates to psychology again, but this time I think he formalizes it more. It's like a more formal approach to the nature of alchemy and psychology. So basically you have to read the psychology of alchemy to understand all the alchemical concepts, and then this takes some of the more sophisticated alchemical concepts and places them in the context of like analytical psychology, and I believe he analyzes some of the symbols and how they relate to human psychology. So I think like there's a whole chapter in here about the nature of Virgin Mary and how that's an alchemical symbol and how that relates to human psychology. Should be fun once I understand it, but again, my concern is it's going to be really esoteric, because when a book is this big, I always think, okay, this is going to be esoteric. But two, it's Jung. And Jung is, like, I always think like Jung is like just short of Hegel and Sartre levels of esotericism, but almost up there with like Nietzsche and Marx. And that, therefore, like, they can't write in normal English. They have to write in very sophisticated, hard to understand English, even for someone who reads such as me. So we'll see how this goes, okay? Another book to follow the Jung book up is another Jung book, Psychology and Alchemy. Now, this book, I believe, is actually going to be very important for me to read because it teaches what Jung conceives as alchemy and how it relates to analytical psychology and how alchemy should be used in therapeutic practices. So this book will be important for me to understand pretty much every other book Jung ever wrote. I don't know much about alchemy. I've read the portable Joseph Campbell kind of book. That book basically has a bunch of essays that are important, that he thought was foundational to Jungian psychology. And I'm going to read Man and His Symbols, which is another book that's considered like a good introductory book to Jungian thought. But this book is also important if you want to read some of his later books. In fact, I have one book here that you will see just how important it is to read this book first. So those are some of the new books I got in my library. The library is getting quite big. The next video I will make is the video that everyone has asked for like 100 times, overrated and underrated books. I have a stack ready. I'm actually already like looking at them. But I needed to do this video because I just have too many books in my like I make a stack of books where I just like got books that I bought, and I try to make one of these videos every 10 books. But I'm going to buy all the Nietzsche books, and so therefore I'm going to have like 30 or 20 books sitting, and the video would just be too long. So I had to make this video. But yeah, those are the new books I got. If you like some of them, let me know. I'd love to discuss some of these books with you guys. And with that being said, tschüss.